absolutely thrilled to invite Garret Grajek here with me today. Garret is the founder and CEO at YouAttest. He's also a 10 times patented identity expert, so very much knows the identity space. Garret, thank you for joining us, and why don't you have a moment to maybe give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Katie. Yes, Garret Grajek, identity guy. That's pretty much what I go off by this time. That's what I've been doing pretty much my whole career. We, started as a programmer out in a wonderful and very, and grateful for it town of Austin, Texas. Where ideas flow and you're encouraged to have them. So from there, after programming, I got immediately into identity companies like RSA and Integrity. RSA for two-factor. Integrity was the world's first single sign-on company. From there, I did other work over at IBM and Cisco and others, but that work I did in identity around RSA, which was a two-factor company, and Integrity, an SSO company, I combined into the world's first two-factor IDP, identity provider, SecureAuth. And I ran that on the technical side for a little over 8 years. And that thing, had a nice exit for everyone. And it was based on taking ideas in the marketplace, basically two-factor and SSO, and combining them. From there, I went on and created a bunch of AI for a wonderful company called Cylance, which was way ahead of its time and allowed me to experiment and create zero trust AI models for a product we called Persona. When that was bought by BlackBerry, I started YouAttest, company right here, which is an AI-based identity governance company. That is, it's in identity still, but now on the governance side, and simplifying governance, which is security and compliance for identity resources. So yes, that's what I've been doing. And there's a lot of identity in that because that's what I do.
Awesome. And what an incredible career that you've had. I mean, you've gone from working in the global enterprises like the IBMs, the Ciscos, and I think you're underplaying how unbelievable the work that you did at SecureAuth was and just how good that exit. Obviously, Cylance, the opportunity to really be working on innovative kind of technology and products and really spearheading that. But also, you're doing the startup thing again at YouAttest. And I think kind of you've had such an impressive career. It'd be really interesting to maybe kind of just dive a little bit deeper into maybe how did you get to where you are today? Because there's some very exciting names and some big achievements in that portfolio of yours. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about that journey that you've been on.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in incrementalism and just constantly stay at it. And that's what we did, to create, for any of those in the category by creating SecureAuth, right? I mean, we started from scratch. What I did is I had a really good crypto programmer that I found in all places in Bosnia, okay? And then I combined that with resources on coding the back end and some resources I had over in India. And then I had a front end person in America. And it was just, other than about 20-hour days, that's how we created the product. Okay. And then, got the first version out there, showed people, and then was able to get it funded. But that's what it is. It did start with an idea that I said, this could all be simplified. This could be simplified and this could be made easier. And that is basically the premise of most of my inventions and most of my patents, where I just look at something and say, all right, I get it. This is how you do it. That's how it's being done. And I acknowledge why it's being done today. But with different thoughts and different processes and different technologies, we can greatly simplify. And that's what I did at YouAttest again. I just took something that I felt was the need was there, the attestation, which is the concept of recertifying what permissions that we have, and especially for sensitive data like your NII, NIH, which everyone is talking about now in identities. You have to attest which identities people have. I came up with a system that rapidly deploys instead of 6 months, 18 months, which the competitors have. And that's where I tend to look. I tend to, take my brain, focus it on one aspect, see how it can be improved, and then just stay on it. It is really, all the, the awards and accolades people get. It's really, well, thanks. I don't know who was giving me awards, accolades at 2 a.m. when I was working on it. So that's the real truth of it. Yes.
No, amazing, and I think kind of you've mentioned something there that is definitely important, and I think it's the fact that how do you simplify something? Because at the end of the day, I think cyber is often overcomplicated. I think it's often, very complex subject, and it can be overwhelming, especially if you are if you're a CISO, you don't necessarily have to specialize in every single aspect of security, but it's your responsibility to overlook all of security. And yeah, I suppose that's a pretty critical element when bringing something new to the market. And obviously your expertise is the world of identity. And I think something that's been really prevalent over the past couple of months since the kickoff of the conference season is actually how hot of a subject identity is right now, whether that's non-human identities, whether that's kind of, just businesses recognizing that it's a huge touch point and I suppose where a lot of the vulnerabilities are falling. So what would you say you can see happening in the space at the moment? Why do you think this is maybe coming to the forefront of all the conversations?
Well, I mean, it's being driven of course, by technology. It's driven by technology because we can abstract the services that were once held within enterprise themselves. Okay, but technology without business justification is irrelevant, right? I mean, it's like that's a pretty neat thing, parlor game. Okay, cost cutting. Cost cutting has exploded the cloud. Okay, what we used to call the cloud is now IT. Okay, that's pretty much it. There's no one's going to conferences and saying I'm going to talk about the cloud. It's like, well, it's how we deploy IT, and it makes economic sense. But what happens when you do go to outside resources and outside all of the controls? And that's what security things. And when you hear people talking in conferences about controls, it's just a security piece. All the on-premise controls become irrelevant. They just no longer exist. Okay, and the only thing we have to ensure that the right people are getting the access is identity controls. So basically, it's a complete wipeout of every other control that we have ever used. And it's kind of underplayed how relevant that is. No one's setting up AWS right now instead of using the service is saying, okay, great, I got to configure their network. You don't. It's not your network. It's their network, right? It's not their. Like you can drop maybe some pieces in the application firewall or whatever. But the deciding factor of who will get your resource in the cloud is the identity that you establish, and then you authenticate. And now the key thing going forward, you authorize. Okay? And if we're not doing a good job of establishing that identity, and then most importantly, where I think the market is going, authorizing that identity, we're done. I mean, it's you can just keep on sending out terabytes to whatever hacker you want because that's what's happening. So we just must remember that because of economic, directions and because of efficiencies, and the cloud's great. I mean, I'm sitting there going, there's no one on this side of the mic being bashing the cloud. Cloud's great. It won because it makes sense. My analogy is like 1920s to 2020. In the 1920s, and being American, I grew up in Chicago and saw the old pictures. Everyone had their own furnace. They really did. They had their own furnace. You had all these ways that produce electricity and all these ways that produce energy, and it was a mess. I mean, it really was. I mean, it was like different standards and the pollution controls. It was just nasty. So, give that 10, 15 years to work out, energy production was centralized, okay, into, much larger facilities with greater efficiencies. That's what's happened in IT in the last 10 years. Literally, last 10 years. When I started as an SC, I would fly around the country and I would deploy, about 20 years, I would fly around and deploy IT and identity solutions on premise. Now, no one does that. Now you just log on and you get into someone AWS, or not picking on GCP or Azure domain, and you go configure and you integrate your solution, and voila, it's a greater efficiency of resources, of humans, and also of deployments, is to have a cloud-based solutions. But we have to assure that the identity which is conducting the action is actually authorized to do that action.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose that, it seems so obvious that, of course, that's harder to do remotely. Of course, it's not the same as being able to have somebody walk into the office and be able to kind of verify them just then and there. But it ultimately, I suppose there's loads of challenges that are kind of coming with this. And I think the market needs to shift slightly to accommodate some of these new demands, because there's lots of new product vendors coming out, there's lots of new solutions, but alongside that, there's lots of problems. And I think kind of, we've briefly talked about this before, but that there's really a change that does need to happen to meet the demand of customers. And I suppose kind of just from your perspective, what do you think some of the key things are that really need to be considered right now?
I think the key thing to consider is, what value are we getting? And I can cite, and I won't, the companies I'm working with, what value are we obtaining from the current products we have, and on top of that, the current services that we have? I see a really big shakeup in not just the products that we are delivering, but the dollars and the enterprises that are offering the services around those products. And I'll be succinct. When I think the last 20 years, the most important factor in integrating solutions and integrating enterprise solution have been the large SIs. That's just what it is. If you're into identity, you know that, well, it's mostly, hey, there's a few products, and then there's these enormous SIs that charge, literally millions to get them deployed. Okay. Will that remain? Yeah, I think that will remain. That will remain for the top 5% companies. The countries, the top 5%. I think the other 95% is open. I really do. And I think that space, because the products like YouAttest are about simpler deployment and lower expertise needed to operate. So who does that mean? Garret, you just said that everything's being, outsourced. It's not going to be in this house. Right. It's not. I'm not talking the IT shops themselves will be running it. No, I don't. I believe you see a great expansion in the MSP, the managed service providers. Okay? Because the managed service providers have already taken over key roles. And that's how IT is, and that's how humans are, whatever. Once they get a foothold, then they expand. The MSPs took over device management like 10, 15 years ago. Great. Why? Because no one wanted to do it. Seriously, I mean, the enterprises didn't want to do it. God knows the SIs didn't want to do it. Who wanted to do device management? So these little MSPs, around the world took over device management. But what happened is they became part and parcel of the enterprise themselves. They were like, oh, well, Charlie really knows his stuff. He got all our Androids and Apples to work together. He locked down the MDMs. He finally figured out how to get our, Windows machines to talk to the servers, that kind of stuff. So what are they doing now? They're expanding the products that they're offering. I see the MSPs taking on identity, taking on IAMs, the controls of IAM, taking on two-factor, and in my space, starting to explore taking on governance. This is a win. This is a win for the enterprises because it's a tightly integrated thing, And it's, I think, the accountability, the immediate accountability. MSPs are called to the map all the time. I mean, they're not, there's no, hey, it's okay, you took me out to a nice dinner kind of stuff. They have to execute, and they have a much higher standard of immediate response that they're held to. So I think it's a win. And in my product myself, I have designed it for the MSPs and even offer it now as an MSSP, which is a service you provide to the MSPs. But I see the main trend, and it's not just identity. I see the main trend in IT, and our products like YouAttest and the products that are forward thinking, they have to be delivered to the market in a way these managed service providers can use.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose kind of just following on from what you referenced there, because for anybody that's kind of looking and nodding their head and going, actually, yeah, I can see that there's a huge gap in the market for this, and for people to really capitalize on it, for these MSPs, the MSSPs and stuff, how do you think they can do that? What's the next steps to be like, okay, there's a huge opportunity here. This is how you can be the first people to really make the most of it, because it's always the trailblazers that they're the ones that are the first to the game.
Yeah, it's happening. It's already happening, and the MSPs that I see it are, they're business people. They're business people first, and that's what the real differentiator about the MSPs are, is how market responsive they are. They're much more nimbler than the large SIs. Okay, it's, yes, they're not saying, some guy, Garrett, I've been entrenched in this MSP for 6 months. Fine, try to get a SI to turn around. That's years. No one's talking, months in that time frame, right? So it's already happening. And what they're doing is, and I talked to a real guy who really knows his stuff in this space. He's telling the MSPs that they gotta verticalize, and you talk about a win. You can count on both hands how many large SIs there are, right? There's thousands of MSPs, okay? Thousands. And this gentleman was telling them, what you guys got to do is don't generalize, don't verticalize in healthcare. Verticalize that I am the MSP that offers the solutions for heart surgeons, okay? And then you have real value. I mean, that's impossible for the large SIs to do. It's just
Yeah.
literally impossible. But for the MSPs, it makes sense, and it adds value. It adds a lot of value because they can look at their customers and they can say, listen, okay, I get it. You're under, in the US, you're under HIPAA. In England, you're under NIH. You got to be under ISO for doing business in Europe. You got to be under CAR in the US, for California, NYRR in New York. They will know. They will be experts in this. And that's what the customers need. So that's why I see this. It's like everything else in IT. It's already happening. That's what the wonderful thing about IT. It's always happening already somewhere, right? And what happens is the ideas that make sense and the ideas that add business value, and especially in downturns, those are the ones that really rise to the top because they're the most efficient and the most quickest to deploy, is those values come to the surface. So I believe that not only is it going to happen, it's already happening. That the MSPs are open to ones, and there's always, like you said, there's always trailblazers, there's always ones that will start adding business value, and by them differentiating, and in honest, when they start offering services around these solutions like YouAttest, and they start adding the value on it, their profit margins, raise, and therefore they become, more competitive and more visible to the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose kind of with that, because it's, one thing that you kind of referencing there is the fact that this is already happening. And I suppose it's because it's becoming a bit of a hot topic, and you need to maximize as soon as the opportunity is there in the market. You really need to kind of I suppose, take a hold of it and not let go in that sense. And I definitely see, especially within the identity space, there's a lot of MSPs and MSSPs that really are boutiquely kind of specializing within certain identity verticals. But one thing I'm really noticing is the fact that they're stepping away from just the standard kind of big named vendors, and they are looking at some of the smaller kind of more agile businesses that are offering unique solutions similar to YouAttest, in the sense of actually this is a really kind of time saving, cost saving product that's solving maybe a smaller picture and a bigger picture, but arguably some of the big vendors aren't
And
necessarily doing
Katie, it's just a unique way they work that it works, right?
that.
Because
Yeah,
if you think about it, let's just abstract. The standard way that a new idea was brought to a company, right? And a big company was, hey, I got it. You need an identity system. It's all good. We're going to go out to dinner with, big company X, right? They're going to take us out and they'll show us and they'll give you the 5-year plan. And I mean, that's it. I actually work for one of them. So that's how it did. Now it's a phone call or a Zoom from the CTO who's got 9 million things on his plate to his MSP, and he says, "Dude, I'm spending my business in England. Okay, you got to give me a product that ensures an NIH compliant. Okay." And the MSP says, "All right, I'll get back to you, Charles." And he goes and he types and he looks and it goes, I got those things. I got these guys does it, right? And then he purchases it. This is what's really important for people to understand. It doesn't mean he really understands it. He becomes a SME in that product. No, in 2025, he can purchase that as a service. So think of it. You got the company talks to the MSP, right? And he's the warehouse. What do I need? What do I need? And then he goes off and finds it as an MSSP that provides a service to the MSP. And most importantly, Charlie, the customer gets what he needs, right?
yeah,
And the MSP X is the rapid one phone call guy. I can get you that, you know?
yeah,
And it's both. Not only does it work technically, it works personality wise
yeah,
because the MSPs, they are those guys. They're all the ones I know are kind of garage mechanics. You know what I mean? Oh, I'll get that for you. I got that for you. And there's that guy. There's like, oh yeah, I gotta get that sprocket from here. I'll get it. And that's how it works. And
yeah,
so the time to value and in general, their openness to products that work much higher. They're
yeah,
just like, does it work? And then
yeah,
and the ones I'm working with, yeah, they'll kick me through the paces. They'll run a POC, they'll check it, and they're like, rock and roll. There you
yeah,
go. But the ability, their openness to new solution, and their ability to adapt it. It's much different for an MSP. All he has to do is just offer the service, and he's
yeah,
just paperwork, right? He doesn't have to get 300 guys trained that are just out of college,
yeah,
which is what it takes for basically an SI to take on a product. So
yeah,
that's where you're seeing it, yeah. And I don't, and it's like everything else. I don't see it. I don't see the SIs going away. They offer a functionality. They offer the accountability and the execution for the top 5%. But I see the next 95% coming up with a different model.
yeah.
Because that model doesn't work for them. It's literally, I mean, the price the response time is too long, and the price is way too long.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting to see, but it's definitely the way that you're talking about a simplified service in the same way with a product, but there's also the lack of bias in the sense that actually I can go out there and almost get you any solution to your problem, and as long as I'm solving your problem, then that's all that matters. I'm not specifically looking at, oh, I have to try and sell you
And
this
Katie,
specific
that's the
product.
contract. That's literally the contract. The contract that the MSP makes to the customer is that I will provide you services. That's
Yeah,
the contract. So it's in the nature of the contract itself to be a solutions guy. It doesn't
Yeah.
say, I will provide, the FTEs, everyone in my group will be knowledgeable and no, that's not the contract. The contract is, I will help you get services for your company can run or your enterprise. And
Yeah.
I think that is why the MSP model works, and that why it works and why it's more open to products.
Yeah. No. And I think kind of then to close out on that, Garret, because I think everything that you're saying there resonates, and it's you're coming from somebody who has worked in the larger enterprises, you've worked in kind of the that big game, but you've also seen it from the flip side of being that product guy and I suppose having to see how do we make sure that this product is going out to market in the right kind of way. And I think we've touched base on a lot there, but I'd be really interested to close. What are your predictions outside of this? So, okay, yeah, we can see where the services side is definitely heading, but identity and everything as a whole is like we've said, it's a hot topic, it's an in-demand topic, and it doesn't matter what part you're in, whether you're the vendor, the customer, or the integrator or the service provider, the everybody's having to pivot slightly in the way that they're working to kind of, I suppose, stay up to date with the demand. So what are your predictions, or even better, what are you excited about in this space? What do you see coming on the horizon?
Rephrase that. Not only what are my predictions, what I'm excited about, because business wise, I see that the MSP model is going to be it's like everything else in the business models. It's just obvious. It's just the way we're going. Okay. Technology-wise, I don't think the rest of the world outside of us, hardcore identity guys, are getting what's really happening, okay? Because if you ask your average person on the street, how are we going to solve identity, hacking? And they're like, well, I don't know. I do these little codes, you know what I mean? Or I take the SMS or whatever. That's not going to do anything. Okay, guys, we've had that. Someone take it from someone that has about 8 patents in authentication. I get it. There's nothing wrong with it. It was this. Look up the whole and the U.S. CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, did real good work around zero trust. Okay, they did not invent zero trust, and I think that's a whole nother webinar. Who invented, where, whatever. I have my own opinions. Anyways. What's relevant is they documented a really good way to message and talk to people about it. And it's called the Zero Trust Maturity Model. And they did a really excellent, I always cite it. And then you can map products and you can map your enterprise to where you want to be on it, okay? And where you are and where you want to go. And that's hugely relevant to identity, because they say there's 4 stages to zero trust in all technology, identity being one of the pillar. They say there's the traditional. Traditional says, we just got a bunch of spreadsheets and emails, and that's our process, okay? And that's traditional. And then to initial, what's the initial state of identity? The initial state is automation. That's what YouAttest is. It automates the process of identity attestation. And that's why you should look at everything you're doing, whether you're talking network, data, whatever. Are you at the initial state where it's all manual, or are you at the initial state where now you've automated? But Garret, isn't there more? There's a lot more. The next step is advanced. Advanced says the technology that I got, is it intelligent? I don't know why the hell they don't use the word AI. They won't, okay? But intelligent means that there's something going on inside of it that's coming up with its own indicators. And that's AI, right? And that's what I did in this product. That there's an immediate indicator based on AI or an event that the solution can provide. That's the advanced. Okay, now you asked me 2 things. Where is the industry going? And what am I excited about? Optimal. The optimal state of zero trust. And now I'll tell every CISO out there or whatever, if anyone says their product is optimal state of zero trust, you're allowed to throw your Android iPhone at their head, okay? Because no one is optimal. No one, not YouAttest, not always. Optimal is when the products like YouAttest dialogue to the other products. So the intelligence that I have about an identity is passed on to an application, passed on to a router, passed on to some other mechanism that works as an enforcement point. That's where we need to go, right? Why? Because I, as a governance product, have information on these users that say, I want to trust this user. I have an AI-based identity trust score. I want to trust this user. And oh, by the way, application firewall, you're about to let out a terabyte of sensitive healthcare data. Maybe you should check whether I trust that user, not the stupid authentication that was flipped out because of the hack, right? But the actual identity. That's the optimal state of zero trust. And that's when we start winning. So does it sound like I believe that we'll solve the identity hacking problem when we start working together and we start authorizing with information from other resources integrated? Yes. That's what I'm doing at YouAttest, and that's the way I see the industry going. The industry going, and if y'all want to look it up, just look up the concept of shared signals. That's what we call it, shared signals, which is there is information about a user or an entity that would be greatly improve the decision-making process of another process, but they gotta talk. These processes talk. If they don't talk, it has no value. That's where I see the industry going.
Awesome. And I think Garret, there's no doubt it's an exciting time. There's change happening. We've covered that. And I think this has been an unbelievable episode to be able to just give a real deep dive into a very important part of security, but I think a part of security that's been overlooked for a very long time. And like we've said, now more than ever is definitely taking the lead when it comes to topic discussions. But Garret, honestly, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I think you've referenced some really valuable things today, and absolutely, I think you've evidenced that if anybody wants to learn a little bit more, to reach out, because by all means, identity definitely is your expertise. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Great questions.